Hi, May. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I'd love to ask you some questions that I know our audience would love some answers to. But before we do all that, can you give me a quick introduction to yourself and your restaurants?
I'm May Chow. I have two restaurants, Little Bao and Happy Paradise. And also I have a creative arm, which is Chow Industry that does food special projects.
That sounds very, very exciting. I know that we'll probably dig into that in a little bit. But our topic here today is how do you balance being authentic to your Chinese roots while sharing your food to an international audience?
I think my past experience, especially with Happy Paradise, Little Bao, which explores a lot of local culture, Chinese identity in a very international city, I think it's a really great place to learn how to cater to an international mindset. We realize that, depending on, there's three key components that we have to consider. One is I have personal pillar to progress Chinese culture or share Chinese culture. Of course, you also have an artistic creative side that you want to do things that have never been done before or you hope that is unique in the market set as of today. And then three is how do you balance business and financial with those in equal importance. So we first found out, for example, a good example is our signature dish, the yellow wine chicken at Happy Paradise. It was actually featured on BBC, and it was shared a lot among like foodies. But we realized that in terms of depending on where the person comes from and what type of culture they come from, looking at a poached chicken with yellow skin on top, we realized that in certain if people were from the UK or from Australia, they might consider that that chicken is raw. And so those are things that, until we were presented with those challenges, we had to learn in dealing with that, and then also understanding that we can cater different specialty items to different market sets while considering what those market sets are used to, exposed to, and understanding where they're coming from. And we explore a lot of those directions.
And so to follow on to that, what I'd love to know is what is your creative process when you are coming with a truly authentic, yet original, yet relatable dish?
There's a lot of things that I love to share, whether it's as simple as family style sharing, to using chopsticks, to as complex as understanding why silkiness or poach, what we call comforting feelings for Chinese cuisine is. And so that exploration we've done through Little Bao, which is what we wanted it to be like the Disneyland, where you could enjoy it in any capacity that you understand Chinese food, but there's still enough we integrated flavors into burgers, we integrate flavors into comfort foods that are universally understood. So that is a more simple take towards of Chinese authenticity. You can say that it's a little bit, simplified a bit, but I still feel like it has, enough integrity to share to a mass audience. Versus Happy Paradise, we were set up to think more about the deeper regional cuisines and exploring things that I'm interested in as even a foodie myself. So you might have things like, looking into Hakka food, typical independent village signature dishes within Hong Kong, Shanghainese cooking styles and ingredients, and showcasing ingredients that are not commonly found in a normal in an average restaurant. So we look at the range of development that we could do, and so Happy Paradise is definitely more on the much more progressive side, but it's also not the most financially successful, because you have to understand anything that's like too ahead of the trend, or it's not something that guests actually want. I spent about 4 to 5 years developing its identity, and it's not something that's gonna run out of the park day one, and that should be expected and almost like nurtured to understand that that will come. You can't necessarily have things hand in hand, whereas versus Little Bao, when we're just saying simple things like it's a Chinese burger, we're just celebrating things that people love already, and we're just kind of putting a brand identity of story around it. That's gonna kick it out of the ballpark right away, and so you're gonna see a little bit of both of those things.
Now, you're a very out of the box person in general, and your ideas are awarded for being out of the box. Do you ever get compared to being a Chinese chef? In what ways do you normally respond to that kind of question?
I think in order to be authentic, it's also to be honest and have transparency. I never claim to be like, a traditional Chinese chef. What we try to, really communicate a lot about is that I come from a Western cooking background. So when we play with Chinese flavors or Chinese ideas or this whole identity of me being Chinese, I need to be honest to myself, and I need to share that to the community as well. So I would not want people to mistaken that I am taking over a traditional Chinese restaurant. So it's really important to understand my role in the ecosystem. My role in the ecosystem might be as inspiring as to traditional Chinese chefs to think about dishes, because when we take inspiration, we also take knowledge from places like Noma, or like cool places in Australia, and people who are forward thinking, and we might think about the technical skill or the way that they use water, from even like how coffee is made, and then someone decide that using a certain type of alkaline water will make stock taste better. And if we implement that into a Chinese thought process, what would that be? And I like, I'm almost pigeonholing to a certain point where you're just, you see yourself having this, you see a gap in a place. It can be a very specific gap that someone is not fulfilling. And if you feel that you can make that gap better, I would rather focus on that than focusing on mastering everything. Because the challenge of Chinese cuisine is that it's so vast, and to master all of it might take someone 30 years. And so to master one or two things might be, or even to create changes within those, a very small part of it might be even more crucial or more potent.
Well, in that thread of thought, what kind of gaps do you currently see that you would love to tackle and address in the next few months, so to speak?
I already kind of know, my creative process always has a little bit of a R&D component to it. I would say research and development is a huge part, especially learning from a lot from, the more European or forward-thinking places like Copenhagen. The first thing they do is go into R&D. And I think that is a huge part of what I want to do. And then so when I even look at things simple as traditional turnip cakes, I look at perfect ratios, I look at water content, I look at ingredient sourcing, sustainability. And I think that even in how we challenge and think about how we can present things is maybe because, we should care about the environment, but how do we present it to an audience that's both local and international? And how do they relate to the same product differently? So maybe if we look at something like Impossible as an ingredient, which is very cool to, replace a lot of, real meats, but how a local market will look at it versus how an international market, maybe international market will be more focused on animal cruelty and then sustainability as well, impact to the environment. But maybe for local Chinese, I was the other day thinking about how Buddhism relates a lot to, fundamental thinking and a family structure. And so if we use collecting good karma, or saying that, it saves a lot of animals, but it's good for the fortune for your future generations. Maybe it's the same goodwill, but that direction is different because we come from different cultures, and it's okay to share a good message in different ways. And I think that that's what we always do. We're very mindful about that when we share our belief system to guests.
Now, what would be really great is if you can maybe give us an example. So you've already given us an example about your guests, say, coming to Hong Kong and experiencing your creative processes, directly through food in Little Bao and Happy Paradise. Mm-hmm. Do you have any examples, because you're a very widely traveled person, of when you, say, brought authentic Chinese roots to an international audience in their home and in their environment?
I like using stories to connect to people. So it could be, sometimes it's not just focused on the food itself. So I recently went to Brussels, and we played with the idea of Mao Tai, which is a national drink, but we know that Mao Tai is a very challenging to drink for a Western person who has no exposure to it at all. Two, Western people don't really like eating fermented bean curd or anything that actually fermented tofu is not something that's a normal category to access. So I was given a cheese course, and I decided that it was not necessarily to just do fermented bean curd and stir fry some vegetables and like, you know, show it as its entity, but more like, hey, you know, you guys, you love cheese, right? And so I basically made the like most, it's like the époisse, the Chinese époisse cheese. So it was like punchy, it was like salty, it had a lot of like, you know, aroma, like a very good aged cheese, which, you know, they could totally relate to, but I used fermented bean curd to make it. And then by showcasing it during a cheese course, and then we had Mao Tai, which was a good ingredient with the pairing, and I soaked persimmon with the Mao Tai, and then we made a glaze around it. And it was they said it was one of the best dishes of the night, and I was basically able to share with them, like, you know, if you're like Obama and you go to China, and then you have to have this national drink because it represents, you know, our culture, and you know, fermented bean curd is such a beautiful ingredient, but this is how I will showcase and share the story. So in a way, we entered by presenting it as cheese, but I was able to tell them how it's being used authentically in China, and how, in what occasions would it be used. And I think that that's, you know, beyond the plate, and that's the part of the storytelling, the branding, and the communication that, you know, people should also focus on.
Well, thank you so much. I feel like we're at the end of our time here. I'm just going to wrap up to say, if visitors do indeed get to come to Hong Kong, hopefully soon, I think they'll get an experience and expression of that in your foo cheese tart at Happy Paradise. Is that right?
Yeah, so fermented cheese, we did a Bass molten cheesecake tart, and we thought that it was a pretty fun twist on what is already very trendy, and but also, like, you know, has an authentic twist to it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. See you later.